For over 200 years, one name has lingered in the shadows of power, whispered in back rooms, scribbled in conspiracy forums, and blamed for almost every economic collapse, war, or global decision you were never part of: the Rothschilds. Some call them the architects of the modern financial system, others the invisible rulers of the world. Their story is wrapped in coded language, secret meetings, and billion-dollar decisions made behind closed doors. But how much of this is true? Were they really pulling strings from behind the curtain, or have they become the perfect scapegoat for a world desperate to explain its own chaos? Today, we're not following a theory. We're following the money, the documents, and the trail history tried to bury. Because before you can understand the conspiracy, you need to understand how the legend began. Born in the crowded lanes of Frankfurt's Judengasse in 1744, Meyer Amschel Rothschild emerged from the shadows of the ghetto into the epicenter of European finance. His family name came from a simple red shield, zum roten Schild, painted above their house, a symbol they would one day make legendary. Orphaned at a young age, Meyer began his trajectory as a dealer in rare coins and currencies. By his early teens, he was apprenticed in Hanover, mastering foreign exchange and international trade. Returning to Frankfurt in 1763, he leveraged key royal connections, most notably with the court of Hesse, and by 1769 had become a trusted agent for ruling nobility, with privileged access to state funds and princely treasures. In 1760, Meyer opened a modest money-lending and trading office in Frankfurt, but his vision extended far beyond the ghetto walls. He understood that longevity meant family cohesion and international reach. So in 1810, he formalized a banking partnership with 3 of his sons, laying the groundwork for what would become the most enduring private banking network in Europe. His true stroke of genius lay in how he prepared his sons, Amschel in Frankfurt, Nathan in London, James in Paris, Solomon in Vienna, and Karl in Naples, to act as guardians of the same mission. Each branch carried the coordinated purpose of his empire. Their guiding motto: Concordia, Integritas, Industria. Unity, integrity, industry. By the time of his death in 1812, Meyer Amschel Rothschild had transformed a simple currency exchange shop into a continental financial powerhouse. Amschel took over the Frankfurt house, while his brothers consolidated in their respective capitals. But from this legitimate success, something else began to take root: whispers of envy, rumors of hidden power, and the first seeds of the conspiracy that would eclipse their bank books. In 1815, Europe stood at a turning point. Napoleon's return from Elba threatened to unravel the fragile balance of power. On June 18th, the fate of the continent would be decided at Waterloo. But while armies clashed on the battlefield, another game was unfolding in the capital of finance. Nathan Mayer Rothschild, stationed in London, held a unique advantage. He had both the ear of governments and the trust of the market. More importantly, he had access to a private courier network, faster than any official dispatch, linking Brussels, Ostend, and the London Stock Exchange. The story goes that Nathan received the news of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else in England. That gave him a window to act. As the legend tells, he began selling government bonds aggressively, creating panic in the market. Prices dropped sharply. While other investors raced to offload, Nathan quietly started buying. They say he picked up undervalued bonds en masse. Then, when the general public caught wind of the victory, prices rebounded rapidly. He reportedly profited by millions, cementing his reputation as a financial genius and fueling rumors of market manipulation. But what really happened? Historical records confirm Nathan did receive early news through a courier sent by the Duke of Wellington. His network was indeed efficient and privileged. He did sell portions of British consols, triggering alarm. And he did buy significant positions afterward, capitalizing on the market swing. Yet recent analysis tells a more nuanced story. The scale of his bond selling is likely exaggerated. What appears more plausible is a shrewd strategy, a smaller initial sale to test the waters, followed by a targeted accumulation as prices dipped. Then came the rebound, though by that time, many investors outside his circle had already acted. The result? Nathan profited, but not in the game-breaking, stock market melting way the myth claims. That didn't stop the legend from growing. Newspapers in London and Amsterdam started discussing a Rothschild inside trader. Some accused him of controlling the market. Cartoons mocking a secret financier pulling invisible levers began to circulate. The most enduring myth was that Nathan sold so heavily that he bankrupted the English government, then bought it back overnight. But nothing in the Treasury records supports such extreme claims. Instead, his move appears as a calculated bet, brave, strategically timed, but still within the rules of the market. Still, the timing was remarkable. Hearing of Napoleon's loss hours before official reports reached the market was an advantage few could match. Leveraging both relationships and speed, Nathan exploited the info edge. And whether truth or legend, that edge became the cornerstone of the Rothschild myth, the image of a family able to direct economies from behind velvet curtains. The episode carried symbolic weight because it sounded cinematic. A lone messenger speeding across Europe, a shadow in the city of London, a dramatic shift in bond prices, and with it, a suggestion that entire nations could be made or broken in moments. Whether fact or fiction, it became the template for the conspiracy narrative. Finance as an invisible weapon wielded by unseen hands. In truth, Nathan's actions in 1815 reflect early forms of info asymmetry and market timing, not unusual in financial history. But the story acquired moral undertones: heroic opportunist or puppet master. The market saw wins, historians saw strategy, and the public, they saw mystery. When newspapers and pamphlets whispered Rothschild, most readers didn't know about the courier network, the trade flows, or the bond mechanics. They only heard about the sudden fall, the sudden rise, and the man who seemed to stand at the center of it all. This was the moment that transformed a successful investment firm into an enduring myth. A single event, a blend of speed, access, and rumor, turned into a symbol of hidden power. And once the seed of doubt was planted, it never fully disappeared. After Waterloo, the Rothschild network didn't slow down, it expanded. And with expansion came new accusations, this time with global reach. Throughout the 19th century, Europe was rarely at peace. Nations mobilized armies, borrowed heavily, and plunged into wars that demanded vast sums of money. And at the center of this financial machinery stood the Rothschilds. By the 1820s, the family had offices in Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, each brother running his branch, but always in coordination. This wasn't just banking. This was an early form of global capital logistics. Governments came to them for one reason: they delivered, fast, discreetly, and often when no one else could. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschilds had already shown their capacity for complex funding. They arranged the transfer of large sums, sometimes in gold, across battlefronts, often risking their own resources. Their network of couriers, agents, and local contacts allowed them to move money faster than official state channels. But with power came perception. As more wars broke out, rumors intensified. Were the Rothschilds financing both sides of the same conflict? The answer is more complicated than the myth suggests. Historically, the Rothschilds did provide loans to multiple governments during periods of war, but not always to opposing sides at the same time. Much of their business was centered on Britain, Austria, and later France. Their clients were mostly monarchies and empires aligned with each other against revolutionary forces. For example, during the Crimean War in the 1850s, the Rothschilds helped finance Britain and France, both fighting against Russia. There's no documented evidence that they simultaneously funded the Russian side. Similarly, during various European conflicts, their primary customers remained the established powers of Western Europe. But perception cared little for nuance. To the public, a bank that profited during war was already suspicious. A bank that worked with multiple governments, even more so. One particular flashpoint was their involvement in issuing war bonds. These instruments allowed governments to raise funds quickly from investors, with the Rothschilds acting as intermediaries. The family didn't just lend their own money, they mobilized capital from across Europe. This role made them essential to state survival, but also positioned them as targets for criticism. Pamphlets circulated, accusing them of orchestrating conflicts for profit. Cartoons depicted them as puppet masters, moving soldiers like chess pieces. Anti-Semitic narratives fused with financial paranoia, creating an image of the Rothschilds as omnipresent war profiteers. Behind closed doors, the family remained silent. They rarely issued public statements, preferring confidentiality over defense. Their philosophy was simple: let results speak louder than accusations. And the results were undeniable. By the 1850s, the Rothschild banking empire was one of the most powerful private financial entities in the world. Their clients included kings, emperors, and governments in desperate need of liquidity. Yet the irony was clear. The very success that made them indispensable also made them the perfect villain for an increasingly skeptical public. Were they manipulating wars or simply operating within the brutal logic of 19th century geopolitics, where money followed power and power demanded financing? What remains true is this: while soldiers fought on muddy fields and diplomats negotiated in candlelit rooms, the Rothschilds moved capital across borders with unmatched precision. They weren't writing history's declarations of war, but they were undoubtedly writing some of its most important checks. And with each transaction, the myth grew. By the late 19th century, the Rothschilds were no longer just bankers. They had become something else, an idea, a symbol, and for many, an obsession. Their business continued to thrive. They funded railways across Europe, underwrote government bonds, and expanded into mining, infrastructure, and even wine production. Their homes became palaces, their art collections rivaled those of royalty, and their influence stretched from London to Vienna. But as their fortune grew, so did something else: public suspicion. The era of mass media was emerging. Newspapers were becoming cheaper, pamphlets more accessible, and political discourse more polarized. In this climate, conspiracy theories found fertile ground. One narrative dominated: that the Rothschilds controlled global finance and manipulated governments for their own secret agenda. The seeds of this myth weren't entirely spontaneous. Anti-Semitic propaganda, already circulating in Europe, found a perfect scapegoat in a wealthy Jewish banking family. Politicians in financial crises pointed fingers. Writers looking for a villain filled columns with speculation and half-truths. Cartoons of the time showed caricatures of Rothschild bankers as octopuses stretching their tentacles across continents, or as shadowy figures hovering over maps of Europe. These images weren't just visual exaggerations. They shaped public perception, embedding the Rothschild name deep into the psychology of suspicion. One infamous example was in France during the 1880s. Amid economic instability and rising populism, political agitators accused the Rothschilds of manipulating markets and destabilizing governments. They were blamed for currency collapses, for job losses, and even for diplomatic failures. In Germany and Austria, nationalist movements amplified the narrative. The idea that a single family could pull the strings of multiple empires played into fears about foreign influence and loss of sovereignty. What's striking is how often the Rothschilds remained silent. Rarely did they issue public rebuttals. Their strategy was discretion. They focused on business, philanthropy, and expanding their operations. But silence wasn't enough to stop the myth. As the 20th century approached, newer forms of media began to recycle older conspiracies. Books appeared, blending fact with fiction. Political speeches invoked the Rothschild name as shorthand for hidden control. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, one of history's most notorious forgeries, published in the early 1900s, didn't mention the Rothschilds directly in its earliest forms, but later versions and interpretations quickly associated the family with the fictional global Jewish conspiracy described in the text. This connection deepened the myth's reach, making it almost impossible to untangle real history from manufactured fear. Even in countries where the Rothschilds had minimal financial presence, their name became shorthand for secret power. In Russia, in the Middle East, even across the Atlantic in the United States, people who had never interacted with a Rothschild still spoke of them as puppet masters behind global events. The irony? By the dawn of the 20th century, the Rothschild banking houses, while still influential, were no longer the dominant financial players they once were. New competitors had emerged. American financiers like J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers were rising. Yet the myth of Rothschild control remained untouched by economic reality. Because at this point, it wasn't about balance sheets anymore. The Rothschild name had become a vessel, a placeholder for every fear people had about money, power, and the invisible mechanisms of global influence. It didn't matter how many philanthropic projects they funded, how many hospitals they built, or how many cultural institutions they supported. In the public imagination, they were no longer just a family. They were a story. And stories, especially dark ones, rarely die. For all the speculation, all the headlines, and all the whispered theories, one question remains unresolved to this day. How much power do the Rothschilds actually hold right now? The popular image suggests unimaginable wealth, trillions of dollars, some say. A secret empire of banks, media companies, and governments under their control. But when you strip away the rumors and focus on verifiable facts, the reality looks very different. Today, the Rothschild banking family is no longer a single monolithic empire. It's a collection of independent businesses, trusts, and investments managed by various descendants across Europe. The 5 original branches that once coordinated global finance no longer operate as a single unit. Some closed, others evolved, and a few remain active in niche sectors. The London branch, for example, eventually merged and was later restructured. The French branch continues to operate under Rothschild & Company, a multinational investment bank specializing in advisory services, mergers and acquisitions, and wealth management. They are respected players in the financial world, but far from the global puppet masters conspiracy theories suggest. As of recent public filings, Rothschild & Company's total assets under management are measured in the tens of billions, not trillions. Substantial? Yes, but smaller than many modern financial giants like BlackRock, Vanguard, or J.P. Morgan Chase. And what about the family's personal wealth? That's harder to calculate. Much of it is tied up in private holdings, trusts, real estate, and art collections. Estimates vary widely, ranging from several billion to tens of billions across all family branches and individuals. But even on the highest end of credible estimates, it doesn't come close to the astronomical figures circulated online. So why does the myth persist? Part of the answer lies in visibility. The Rothschilds operate with intense privacy. They rarely give interviews. They avoid public displays of wealth. And unlike other billionaire families, they aren't featured on global rich lists like Forbes, primarily because much of their fortune is spread across non-public entities. Another reason? The emotional weight of history. The Rothschild name has become a symbol for hidden influence. Every time a financial crisis hits, every time a currency collapses, every time geopolitics shifts, some part of the internet inevitably points back to them. The absence of clear public financial data only fuels the narrative. In the information vacuum, speculation thrives. Add to that the legacy of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which continue to mutate and adapt to new platforms, from 19th century pamphlets to 21st century social media threads. Ironically, the Rothschilds today are more exposed to the myth than to any real centralized power. While they continue to hold influence in specific financial sectors, especially in Europe, their role is one of many in a complex web of modern capitalism. Private equity firms, state-run sovereign funds, and multinational investment banks now dwarf the reach the Rothschilds once held. And yet, their name remains at the center of the narrative. Because for many, the Rothschild story isn't really about a single family anymore. It's about something larger. Our collective suspicion of wealth without visibility, influence without accountability, and history without full disclosure. The truth is, the Rothschilds built an empire. They shaped financial history. They mastered diplomacy, networking, and risk at a time when the rules of global finance were still being written. But the real conspiracy may not be about what they did. It may be about how much we still want to believe they're doing.